To paint the sun, to paint life itself, as if he sought to change not only religion, but the very soul of Egypt. Yet this dream had enemies. The priests of Amun, who saw it as a threat and feared the loss of their power. In his eyes, they saw a young man unafraid to challenge the gods. In their hearts, they began to plot against the pharaoh who dreamed of a single light within the palace of Thebes. Amenhotep IV began to take his first steps that would lead to a great revolution, but also to a conflict for which he was unprepared. From this moment began the story of Akhenaten, a pharaoh who would change the face of Egypt, yet confront a world unready for his dream. Akhenaten, the young pharaoh, moved steadily toward a revolution Egypt had never witnessed before, a revolution that would transform religion and shake the foundations of power. A few years after ascending the throne, Amenhotep IV, now known as Akhenaten, proclaimed that Aten, the golden sun disk, was the only god worthy of worship. This was not merely a declaration, it was a challenge to millennia of belief. It was, in essence, a declaration of war against the old order, the priests of Amun and the entire old order. In the palace of Thebes, Akhenaten sat with Nefertiti, discussing his vision of the life-giving light of Aten, a world free from the many gods that had divided people's hearts. Nefertiti listened, her eyes shining with faith. She knew this dream was dangerous, yet together they faced the legacy of the colossal temples of Amun, with their towering columns and golden statues. These temples represented overwhelming power, but Akhenaten saw them only as shadows that suffocated the truth. With bold commands, Akhenaten ordered the closure of the temples of Amun. The priests, who had long controlled wealth and influence, suddenly found themselves powerless. Inscriptions bearing Amun's name began to be erased from the walls. His statues were smashed. Akhenaten sought to erase the old religious order from Egypt's history. In the streets of Thebes, people whispered, some in astonishment, others in fear. How could a pharaoh dare to defy the gods? One night, Akhenaten stood in a temple, a small, open sanctuary to Aten, beneath a sky filled with stars. Light poured down from above, flooding the space. He raised his hands to the sun, praying to Aten as if speaking to a living god, a god he saw in everything. In the Nile, in the trees, in life itself. But the priests watched him from afar, their eyes filled with anger. They saw in him a heretic, a man who defied the authority of the gods. This proclamation was not merely a religious reform, it was a revolution. Akhenaten ordered the construction of new temples to Aten, temples without walls, without shadows, open to the sunlight. Artists began to create scenes unlike the old reliefs. They depicted Akhenaten and his family beneath the rays of Aten, the sun stretching out to embrace them. People gazed upon these images, some in awe, others in bewilderment. Yet this revolution did not go unchallenged. The priests of Amun, who possessed immense wealth and influence extending into every corner of Egypt, began to conspire. They met in secret, speaking of the young pharaoh and of his dream that threatened their power. In the marketplaces, people spoke of Akhenaten. Some saw him as a bearer of new light, others saw him as a danger to Egypt. One day, Akhenaten visited an ancient temple of Amun. The priest stood in silence, watching as he ordered the removal of the god's statue. Silence reigned. The only sound was the clang of hammers striking stone. Akhenaten stood there, his determination. He knew this step would change everything, yet this challenge was only the beginning. Akhenaten dreamed of a new Egypt, unaware that his revolution would awaken enemies far stronger than he had imagined, enemies who would not rest until they saw him fall in Thebes beneath the light of Aten. Akhenaten began to reshape the face of Egypt, but in doing so, he was also sowing the seeds of a great conflict. From this moment emerged the Amarna Revolution, a revolution that would both illuminate and burn Egypt. He began his transformation believing in light, not knowing that this light would cast long shadows. He launched his revolution by proclaiming Aten the sole god. The winds were shifting, and the conflict with the priests of Amun was intensifying. The ground itself seemed to tremble under the weight of this challenge, as the temples of Amun were closed and his name erased. According to the inscriptions, Akhenaten did not stop there. He knew that his revolution required more than words, it demanded actions that would shake the very foundations of Egypt. In the palace at Thebes, he met with Nefertiti and his advisors. Those closest to the pharaoh began to plan a greater step, one that would make Aten not only a god, but the symbol of a new era. But the priests were watching, waiting for a moment of weakness. The priests of Amen, whose wealth surpassed even that of the Pharaoh himself, did not accept this challenge quietly. In secret, they gathered within their closed temples, whispering about Akhenaten, calling him a heretic, a pharaoh who had angered the gods. They sowed fear in the hearts of the people, spreading tales of Amen's wrath and of curses that would befall Egypt if this madness continued. In the marketplaces, people spoke in anxious tones, wondering whether Akhenaten was leading Egypt toward destruction. One evening, a crowd gathered around a small temple of Aten. Akhenaten stood there, raising his hands to the sky, praying in a quiet voice as if speaking directly to the sun itself. Nefertiti stood beside him, wearing a white garment bathed in the light of the setting sun. The scene was enchanting, yet frightening to some. The people were seeing their pharaoh, but they were also witnessing a man defying traditions thousands of years old. Some felt inspired, others felt afraid. But the priests were not content with whispers. They began to weave the threads of resistance. They sent messages to nobles and army commanders, warning them that Akhenaten was weakening Egypt. They claimed that the pharaoh was neglecting the borders, ignoring external threats, and focusing only on his dream of Aten. One night, news reached Akhenaten of a small rebellion in one of the provinces. It was not a major uprising, but it was a sign that the struggle with the priests would not be easy. Akhenaten did not retreat. He believed that Aten would protect him and protect Egypt. He began issuing new decrees. He ordered that prayers in the temples be changed, replacing the hymns that glorified Amen with hymns devoted to Aten. Artists began to create new images, depicting Akhenaten and his family beneath the rays of the sun, with Aten blessing them. These reliefs were different from anything before. They no longer portrayed the pharaohs as raging gods. Instead, they showed Akhenaten as a human being, a husband and a father beneath the sunlight. But this transformation provoked even greater anger among the nobles, who depended on the support of the priests. The followers of Amen felt increasingly threatened. Merchants, who relied on the temples as centers of trade, began to fear for their livelihoods. Even the common people, long accustomed to worshipping Amen and Osiris, grew confused. They respected their pharaoh, yet feared the wrath of the ancient gods. One morning, Akhenaten stood before